Mail-order bride with secret fortune arrives to beat Homestead, rebuilds with one-armed blacksmith. Smoke still lingered from the fire that had swept through the homestead weeks ago, leaving only charred timbers and ash. Birds had fled, and even the wind seemed hesitant to pass through the desolation. Amid the ruins, a carriage rolled slowly, its wheels crunching over scorched earth. Inside, Clara sat upright, her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. She watched the distant shapes of ruined walls and collapsed roofs, her chest tightening with a mix of anticipation and dread. She had come here as a mail-order bride, a foreign woman bringing herself and a secret fortune to a home that no longer existed. The letters she had written to the village elders spoke of loyalty and partnership, but they did not speak of the gold hidden in her luggage, enough to rebuild everything, and more. Clara's mind drifted briefly to what awaited her. She had expected smiles, perhaps cautious welcome. Instead, the scorched homestead appeared like a grave, the surrounding forest whispering warnings in the rustle of dead leaves. Yet she had promised herself that she would not falter. She would bring life back to this place, and she would do it on her own terms. The carriage ground to a halt at the edge of the property. Smoke curled from the ground like ghostly fingers, and the acrid smell of burned wood filled the air. Clara opened the door and stepped onto the ash-covered earth. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground remembered the fire and pressed down on her with silent judgment. From the shadows near the blacksmith's workshop, a figure emerged. Gideon, tall and broad-shouldered, leaned against the doorframe. One arm hung at his side, the other scarred and strong, evidence of battles past. His eyes, sharp and wary, studied Clara as if he could see through the fine lace of her gloves and the careful composure she wore like armor. He did not speak immediately, and Clara felt the weight of his gaze, heavy and unflinching. "Clara," she said softly, the name feeling strange on her tongue, as if speaking it aloud gave it life. "You're late," Gideon said, his voice rough like iron scraping over stone. There was no welcome in his words, only caution. I had to travel far," she replied, keeping her tone steady. She did not reveal how many roads she had crossed, nor how many hands had tried to claim her fortune. This was a place she would build from the ashes, and she would not give away any advantage before she needed to. Gideon's gaze flicked over her luggage, noting the sturdy leather cases and small chest strapped to the carriage floor. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You don't travel light." Clara allowed herself a faint smile, though it did not reach her eyes. "I have much to bring back to life," she said, stepping forward. Her boots crunched over ash, the sound echoing across the empty yard. For a moment they simply stared at each other, two strangers linked by circumstance and the charred remains of a home. The silence was broken only by the distant caw of a crow and the wind whispering through the ruined beams. Finally, Gideon nodded once and motioned for her to follow him to the workshop. Inside, the smell of soot and iron was strong. Tools hung neatly on the walls, and the forge sat cold, unused for weeks. The fire that had consumed so much had left behind the blacksmith's sanctuary, and Gideon had spent days cleaning and salvaging what he could. Clara watched him work silently, noticing the careful way he handled his tools, the deliberate movements of a man who had learned to survive despite what life had taken from him. "I can rebuild this place," she said after a while, breaking the silence. "I have the means. And I can help." Gideon's hands paused mid-motion and he studied her. "Help," he repeated, voice low. "You know nothing about this place. You've never swung a hammer, never worked the forge. You'll get in the way." "I know enough to see what needs to be done," Clara said firmly, her eyes meeting his. "And I will not leave until this homestead stands again." Gideon's expression softened, though only slightly. "Determination won't build a home. Sweat and wood and iron will." "I can provide what you need," Clara replied. She wanted to say more, to hint at the gold she had brought, but the moment was not yet right. Secrets were tools as much as they were burdens. "We'll need each other." He studied her for a long moment, then turned back to the forge. "We'll see," he said, and she understood that for him, trust was earned, not given. Over the next few days, Clara began her work. She walked among the ruins, making careful notes, measuring the remaining beams and walls. Each morning, she rose with the sun and worked alongside Gideon, fetching water, clearing debris, and carrying heavy timber. The villagers watched from a distance, curious and skeptical. They whispered about the woman who had come to a home that no longer existed and wondered what power or wealth she might possess. Gideon remained cautious, his one good arm swinging hammers and lifting beams while Clara handled planning, organizing, and even basic construction under his guidance. Slowly a rhythm formed between them. She directed, he executed. She observed, he judged. They argued, they laughed quietly when the sun dipped low in the sky. One evening, after the day's work, Clara climbed a small hill behind the homestead. From there she could see the full extent of the destruction: blackened earth, fallen timbers, and the skeletal remains of what had once been a proud home. She knelt among the ashes, letting the wind lift her hair, and whispered a silent promise. "I will bring you back," she said. "I will bring everything back." From the shadows, a faint rustling stirred. Clara's heart quickened, but when she looked, no one was there, only the wind moving through the charred forest. Yet the feeling of being watched lingered. She shivered, straightened, and returned to the worksite, determined not to let fear take root. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, red shadows over the ruins, Gideon and Clara sat together by the cold forge. They did not speak of the future, only of the work done and the plans for tomorrow. The silence between them was comfortable, yet charged with an unspoken tension. Each understood that the other carried secrets, Gideon with his past, Clara with her fortune. Night fell and the stars began to pierce the dark sky. Clara lit a small lantern in the center of the ruined homestead, the soft glow reflecting off scattered ashes. The light cast dancing shadows across the scorched timbers, and for a moment the ruins seemed alive. "Do you see that?" she asked softly, more to herself than to Gideon. He followed her gaze, noting the shifting shapes. "See what?" "The shadows, they move like they're watching," Clara said. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of unease. Gideon's jaw tightened. "Old places have old spirits," he said quietly. "Sometimes they remember the pain that happened here." Clara nodded, her fingers brushing the handle of the lantern. "Perhaps, but some things must be faced, not feared." The wind whispered again, and the shadows seemed to twist closer. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. The homestead had not given up its secrets, and she knew that rebuilding would be more than brick and timber. It would require courage, trust, and confronting the past that lingered like smoke. Gideon rose, placing a heavy hand on her shoulder. "You've got fire in you," he said, almost a growl. "Don't let it burn you before the work is done." Clara looked up at him, meeting his scarred, wary eyes. For a moment the distance between them seemed to shrink, though unspoken barriers remained. She offered a faint smile. "Then we'll work together, and we'll see who survives the fire, those who rebuilt, not those who ran from it." As night deepened, Clara returned to her small tent near the ruins, the lantern still glowing faintly in the darkness. She lay awake, listening to the whispers of the forest and the creaking of the timbers. Somewhere in the shadows, the fire's memory lingered, a silent witness to the lives it had touched and taken. And in the stillness, Clara made another promise, one she would carry close to her heart. She would not only rebuild the homestead. She would uncover the truth behind the fire, face whatever darkness remained, and rise from the ashes with Gideon by her side, whether he knew it yet or not. But as the wind moaned through the ruined beams and the night deepened, a faint shadow moved near the edge of the homestead, unseen. Something had not forgotten the fire. Something watched, waiting. And Clara, despite her courage and resolve, felt the first stirrings of fear that the past was not yet done with her. Morning light spilled over the charred homestead, painting the ruins in shades of gold and gray. Clara stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the crisp, smoky air. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and ash, a reminder that the fire had changed everything. Yet she felt a spark of hope. Today, the work would continue, and each hammer strike and beam raised was another step toward renewal. Gideon was already at the forge, his broad frame leaning over the anvil as he shaped a piece of iron. His movements were precise and strong, every strike ringing out across the quiet village. One arm swung with skill, the other, missing, rested against his side as if holding back memories of what had been lost. Clara watched him for a moment, feeling a mix of admiration and unease. He was a man shaped by pain, and yet there was a determination in his eyes that mirrored her own. "I've measured the foundation," Clara said, approaching with her notebook in hand. "The beams we salvaged are stable. We can start reconstructing the walls today." Gideon paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Are you sure about this?" His voice was low, cautious. "Some of these timbers might look sound, but the fire, it can hide weaknesses." "I'm sure," Clara said firmly. "We'll work carefully, and if anything seems off, we'll replace it." He nodded slowly, then handed her a hammer. "Then let's see what you can do." Clara accepted it with a small smile. She had never been a blacksmith, yet she knew enough to hold the tool correctly. Together, they began the day's work. As the hours passed, sweat and effort filled the air. Clara carried beams and bricks, measured and adjusted placements, while Gideon shaped metal brackets and lifted heavy planks into place. Their movements became a rhythm, a silent understanding forming between them. Clara began to see the layers of Gideon's strength, not just physical, but emotional. He had survived loss, betrayal, and pain, yet he still worked tirelessly to protect what remained of his home. During a short break, Clara sat on a beam, her legs dangling over the side of the structure. She opened her notebook and made notes about the repairs. Gideon leaned against the wall, watching her with a guarded expression. "You write a lot," he remarked, his tone softening slightly. "I like to plan," she replied. "Without a plan, rebuilding is just guessing, and guessing can be dangerous." Gideon grunted in agreement, though he did not speak further. Clara sensed the weight behind his silence, the unspoken memories of the fire and the family he had lost. She chose not to press him. Some wounds took time to reveal themselves, and trust had to grow slowly, like a seed waiting for spring. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, strange things began to happen around the homestead. A beam shifted slightly as if moved by an unseen hand. A tool slid across the ground without explanation. Clara paused, looking around with narrowed eyes. "Did you see that?" she asked. Gideon followed her gaze, his expression hardening. "Old places remember," he said, "and some memories, they don't like being disturbed." Clara swallowed, trying to steady her nerves. She had heard of spirits lingering in burned homes, but she did not believe in them, at least not fully. Yet the feeling of being watched lingered, a subtle pressure on her mind. She turned back to the work, determined not to let fear rule her. Days turned into weeks, and the homestead slowly began to take shape. Walls rose from the ashes, beams were secured, and the roof started to cover the once exposed rooms. Villagers watched from a distance, their curiosity growing. Some whispered admiration, others suspicion. A woman rebuilding a home with only a blacksmith seemed improbable, yet there they were, working tirelessly. Clara and Gideon grew closer through the work, though neither spoke of it aloud. Moments of shared laughter over a misaligned beam, quiet conversations while lifting heavy timbers, and the unspoken understanding that they relied on each other began to build a connection stronger than either had expected. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of red and orange, Clara approached Gideon with a question that had been on her mind for days. "Why did you stay?" she asked softly. "After the fire, after everything was lost, most would have left." Gideon paused, his hand resting on a wooden beam. He looked toward the horizon, his eyes distant. "I stayed because someone has to protect what's left," he said quietly, "and because leaving would have been giving up on more than a home. My family, my past, it's all tied to this place. I can't run from it." Clara nodded, understanding more than she let on. She had her own reasons for staying, her fortune, her promise, and a desire to reclaim a home that was never truly hers, yet felt like it had been waiting for her all along. That night, as they worked by lantern light, the strange occurrences became more pronounced. Shadows flickered across the walls, and the air seemed thick with whispers that neither could fully hear. Clara touched the edge of a beam, feeling a chill pass through her fingers. "Gideon," she said, her voice low, "there's something here. Something from the fire, I can feel it." He looked at her, his expression serious. "Then we face it together. Whatever it is, it won't drive us away." Clara felt a surge of gratitude and a flicker of warmth in her chest. For the first time since arriving, she felt that she was not alone in this endeavor. The blacksmith who had seemed so distant was now a partner and perhaps something more. Days passed and the rebuilding continued. Clara carefully revealed her plans for the homestead, showing Gideon sketches and diagrams. He listened, offering advice and occasionally teasing her for overly ambitious designs, but he never dismissed her ideas. Their trust in each other deepened, built on shared effort and mutual respect. One afternoon, while carrying a heavy beam, Clara stumbled. Gideon was immediately at her side, steadying her with his strong hand. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment words were unnecessary. The unspoken understanding between them was clear. They were stronger together than apart. As the sun set that evening, casting long shadows over the homestead, Clara lit the lanterns along the walls. The soft glow illuminated the progress they had made, the foundation solid, the walls sturdy, the roof beginning to take shape. Yet, even in the beauty of their work, the past lingered. Gideon stood beside her, his hand brushing against hers as they surveyed the homestead. "It's coming back," he said quietly, "stronger than before." Clara nodded, her eyes reflecting the lantern light. "Yes, and we'll make sure it lasts. Whatever caused the fire, we'll face it, and we'll rebuild not just this place but ourselves as well." A sudden rustle in the nearby woods made them both tense. Clara's grip on the lantern tightened, and Gideon's hand moved instinctively to the small dagger at his belt. For a moment, silence fell, broken only by the distant cry of a bird. Then nothing. The forest remained still, yet the feeling of being watched lingered, heavier than before. "We're not alone," Clara whispered. Gideon's eyes narrowed. "I know, and I don't like it. Whatever it is, it's tied to the fire, and it's not done with this place or us." That night, as Clara lay in her small tent, she could not shake the sense of unease. The lanterns outside cast long, wavering shadows across the ruins, and she felt the weight of history pressing down on her. She thought of the fortune she carried, the promise she had made, and the man she had begun to trust. In the darkness, she whispered to herself, a promise stronger than any fear. "I will see this through. I will rebuild, and I will uncover the truth behind the fire." As sleep claimed her, the shadows around the homestead seemed to shift, moving closer to the walls they had restored. A faint, cold wind brushed against the tent, carrying with it a whisper that made Clara's heart tighten. "Not yet," it seemed to say. "Not until you face what was lost." And Clara knew, with a certainty that left her breathless, that the journey ahead would demand more than strength and courage. It would demand trust, honesty, and a willingness to confront the darkness that lingered not only in the ruins, but in their hearts. For Gideon, the coming days would test his patience and his resolve. For Clara, they would test her secrets, her fortune, and the depth of her courage. But together, they would face the challenge, building not just a home, but a bond forged in ash, sweat, and unspoken longing. The homestead, rising from the ashes, was a symbol of resilience, but the fire's memory was not so easily tamed. Something watched, something remembered. And in the quiet moments between labor and laughter, both Clara and Gideon sensed that the shadows were waiting for the right moment to strike. Yet as the first stars appeared in the night sky, they also sensed something else, a spark of hope, fragile but real, that perhaps even in darkness they could find light. The rebuilt homestead was beginning to take shape. Walls that had once been nothing but ash now stood firm, timber joined carefully with iron brackets. The roof, newly raised, gleamed faintly in the morning sun, and the foundation felt solid underfoot. Clara stood on the porch, hands resting lightly on the railing and breathed in the crisp air, smelling the mixture of wood, earth, and the faint tang of iron from Gideon's forge. Gideon emerged from the workshop, wiping sweat from his brow. His one strong arm carried a bundle of firewood, while the other rested against his side. His movements were steady, deliberate, as always. He looked at Clara, and though his face was calm, his eyes betrayed a tension that had begun to grow over the past weeks. "Morning," Clara said softly, stepping down from the porch. "Morning," Gideon replied, setting the firewood near the forge. "We've got a long day ahead." Clara nodded, her gaze sweeping across the yard. She had begun to plan the next stage of rebuilding. The interior, the small rooms that would become living spaces, the garden that would reclaim the blackened earth. Yet, even as hope grew, so did unease. Something in the homestead felt alive. Not in the way that life is alive, but as if memory itself had taken form, whispering through the walls and floorboards. As they began work, Clara noticed subtle signs that the village was watching more closely. From the distance, figures peeked through the trees, whispers carried on the wind. Some villagers admired their determination, others seemed wary, unsettled by Clara's presence and her unknown fortune. "People are curious," Gideon said during a break, leaning against a post. "Curious, but not all are happy about what you bring." Clara glanced at him, noticing the faint tension in his jaw. "Do you think they're afraid?" she asked. "Afraid that the home will be restored, or that I'll take more than what I show?" Gideon's gaze followed her, his eyes sharp. "A little of both. Some fear change, some fear you." Clara's lips pressed together. She had expected some skepticism, but hearing it aloud made the weight of secrecy heavier. She had carried her fortune like a shield, hidden in plain sight, protecting herself from prying eyes. Now it seemed that even Gideon's presence, solid and reliable, could not shield her entirely from suspicion. They continued their work, raising walls, setting beams, and repairing the forge. Gideon moved with a practiced grace, while Clara guided him, suggesting adjustments, measuring angles, and planning the interior. Slowly, their rhythm became seamless, a partnership forged not just by labor, but by necessity. As afternoon settled, Clara climbed to the loft to examine the framework for the upper floor. The wind whistled through the gaps, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke that had never fully left the site. She traced her fingers along a scorched beam and shivered, feeling the memory embedded in the wood. The fire had left more than physical scars. It had left whispers, shadows that lingered in corners, half seen and unsettling. "Clara," Gideon's voice called up from below. "I'm here," she replied, climbing down carefully. He handed her a hammer and she took it, feeling its weight steady her. For a moment they stood together in silence, looking at the partially rebuilt home. The bond between them had grown, subtle yet undeniable. Clara felt warmth in his presence, a comfort that contrasted sharply with the unease surrounding the homestead. Later, as the sun dipped low, Gideon suggested a break. They sat near the forge, watching the sky turn shades of red and gold. Clara noticed for the first time how the light softened the lines on Gideon's face, how it made his one missing arm seem less a mark of loss and more a symbol of survival. "You've changed this place," Gideon said quietly. "When you arrived, it was ash and shadow. Now it has life again." Clara smiled faintly. "It's not just me, you've helped, I couldn't do this alone." Gideon's gaze held hers for a moment longer than usual. "And yet," he said, voice low. You came with secrets. I can feel them even if you don't show them. Clara's stomach tightened. She had hoped to keep her fortune hidden, to reveal it only when it was needed to rebuild the home fully. But Gideon's words reminded her that secrets rarely remained hidden, especially from those closest to us. I have my reasons, she admitted softly. And some things are safer kept until the right moment. Gideon nodded, a faint shadow crossing his features. I understand, but don't forget we're building more than walls. We're building trust too, and trust cannot survive hidden truths for long. The night fell, and Clara prepared for bed in her small tent near the homestead. The lanterns she had placed earlier cast soft light across the walls, illuminating the progress made. Yet, the shadows seemed longer, darker, as if something lingered beyond the glow. She lay awake, listening to the whispers of the wind and the creaking of the new beams. The sense of being watched had grown stronger, a silent presence hovering near the edges of the homestead. Clara's fingers brushed the small chest hidden beneath her bedroll, feeling the weight of the gold and jewels that could rebuild everything. It was both a comfort and a responsibility, a secret she had carried across distant roads, and one she would continue to carry until the right moment. Suddenly, a soft noise outside the tent drew her attention. She sat up, holding her breath, listening. The rustling stopped and silence returned, yet the unease remained, like a shadow brushing against her mind. Clara knew that the fire's memory was not fully gone. Whatever had caused the destruction might still linger, waiting for a chance to strike again. The following morning, Clara rose early and walked through the homestead. She inspected the walls, the beams, and the partially repaired roof. Every detail mattered. Every measure, every placement could mean the difference between safety and disaster. Gideon joined her, carrying a bundle of nails and brackets. You've been thinking all night, he said, eyeing her carefully. I have to, Clara replied. This home, it needs more than just repair. It needs protection, and I fear the fire may not have been the only danger. Gideon's expression darkened. You're saying someone set the fire deliberately, Clara nodded slowly. I've suspected it, and I think whoever it was may still be nearby. Gideon's jaw tightened. Then we'll be ready together. Their partnership deepened in the days that followed. Clara continued to plan and organize, while Gideon executed the physical labor. Moments of quiet intimacy began to appear, shared glances, a hand brushing against another while lifting beams, laughter when mistakes were made. They both sensed the growing attraction, though neither dared speak of it outright. Trust and attraction were fragile, especially in a place haunted by past trauma. One afternoon, while repairing the roof, Clara lost her footing on a beam. Gideon's strong hand shot out, steadying her just in time. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the air between them felt electric. Clara felt a warmth she had not known in weeks, a connection forged not just in labor but in reliance and mutual respect. You need to trust me, Gideon said quietly, his hand still holding hers. I do, Clara whispered, though she knew trust was a slow flame, one that could be snuffed out if mishandled. As they descended from the roof, the village bell rang in the distance. Figures moved at the edges of the property, watching. Clara's eyes narrowed. They're watching more than ever, she said. They've noticed the progress, Gideon said, and some of them are afraid. Afraid of change, afraid of what we're building. Clara nodded. She understood that rebuilding the homestead was not just a matter of timber and nails. It was a challenge to the village, to the past, and to the secrets that had been buried in ash. That night, they gathered near the forge after the work was done. The fire in the hearth cast long, flickering shadows across the walls. Clara noticed for the first time how the light softened Gideon's features, how it made the scars and the missing arm seem less like marks of tragedy and more like symbols of endurance. I never thought I'd see this place alive again, Gideon admitted quietly. But you've brought something I didn't expect. Hope. Clara felt a warmth in her chest. Hope is fragile, she said softly. We must protect it as we protect each other." A sudden noise outside made them both tense. The shadows outside the forge flickered, moving unnaturally. Clara gripped the edge of the table, her heart quickening. "Not again," Gideon muttered, his hand moving instinctively to his dagger. They stepped outside, lantern in hand, scanning the perimeter. Nothing moved, yet the feeling of being watched lingered. Clara could sense a presence, something tied to the fire, something waiting for the right moment to strike. She turned to Gideon, her eyes reflecting the lantern light. "We're not alone," she said. Gideon's jaw tightened. "I know, and I'll make sure whatever it is never harms this home or you." As they stood together, side by side, the shadows seemed to retreat slightly, yet not disappear. The homestead was stronger now, but the memory of the fire was not so easily forgotten. Somewhere in the darkness, a figure watched, silent and patient, waiting for the moment when the past and the present would collide. Clara felt a chill, but also a growing resolve. Whatever threat lingered, she would face it. Not alone, Gideon would be with her. And together, they would uncover the truth behind the fire, protect the homestead, and perhaps find something deeper in each other along the way. The morning sun rose slowly over the homestead, casting long golden beams across the newly repaired walls. The charred ruins were gone, replaced by strong timber and fresh stone. The scent of pine and earth filled the air, mingling with the faint metallic tang of the forge. Clara stepped onto the porch, breathing deeply, feeling the warmth of sunlight on her face. For the first time since arriving, the homestead felt complete, not just rebuilt, but alive. Gideon emerged from the workshop, carrying a bundle of fresh-cut beams. The wind tugged at his hair, and his one arm moved with ease, steady and strong. He looked at Clara, and a faint smile touched his lips. "It's almost done," he said. "We've come a long way." Clara nodded, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over her. "Yes, but there's still work to do, and we need to be careful. Whatever caused the fire, it may still be nearby." Gideon's gaze hardened, and he placed the beams carefully near the wall. "Then we finish what we started. Nothing will threaten this place or you while I'm here." The day passed in a blur of work and preparation. Clara oversaw the final touches, reinforcing walls, ensuring windows and doors fit perfectly, and arranging the interior to be both practical and welcoming. Gideon moved like a shadow among the beams, hammering, lifting, and guiding. Their partnership was seamless now, a rhythm born of days spent together and challenges faced side by side. As the sun began to dip, Clara suggested they take a break. They sat on the porch, hands brushing against each other as they reached for the same tool. A small laugh escaped them, light and genuine, breaking the tension that had lingered for weeks. "You know," Clara said softly, "I never thought I'd find myself enjoying this, the work, the quiet, even the risk." Gideon tilted his head, a faint smile forming. "Risk can teach you more than safety ever will," he said, "and sometimes it leads to things you didn't expect." Clara felt a warmth in her chest. She knew what he meant. Trust, friendship, and something deeper had grown between them. Yet even in this calm, the homestead's past lingered, a shadow that had not yet fully revealed itself. That evening, as they prepared to leave the porch, movement at the edge of the property caught Clara's eye. A figure slipped silently among the trees, watching. She stiffened, her fingers brushing Gideon's hand. "Not again," Gideon muttered under his breath, rising to meet the threat. Clara followed, her heart quickening. Together they approached the edge of the yard, lanterns casting long beams across the grass. The figure stepped forward, revealing a familiar face, one of the villagers who had fled the fire's aftermath. His eyes were filled with fear, but also determination. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, voice trembling. "Some things are better left buried." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Who caused the fire? Tell us now." The man hesitated, glancing at the homestead. It wasn't meant to hurt anyone. It was revenge for the past, but I didn't know it would burn everything." Gideon stepped forward, his stance protective. Speak clearly, who started it? The man swallowed hard. It was someone close to your family, Gideon. They wanted to punish those who wronged them long ago. The fire was supposed to teach a lesson, not destroy the home. I swear I didn't. Gideon's eyes flashed with understanding, anger, and sorrow all at once. He clenched his fist, the metal of the forged tools pressing into his palm. Clara placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Enough, she said softly. The past is behind us now. We have the power to choose what happens next. Gideon took a deep breath, letting the tension leave his shoulders slowly. You're right, he said. We rebuild, we protect what matters, and we face the future together. The man nodded, relief washing over him. He turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving Clara and Gideon alone with the homestead they had fought to restore. Night fell, and they lit the forge for the last time that day. Sparks flew, reflecting off the freshly cleaned walls, casting dancing shadows across the rooms. Clara moved among the beams, adjusting lanterns and ensuring everything was secure. Gideon watched her, noticing the way her hair caught the firelight, the determination in her eyes, and the strength that had carried them through weeks of rebuilding. I've been thinking, Gideon said, his voice low, about everything we've done, about trust, about us. Clara stopped, turning to him. Yes, he stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking. I can't change the past or the fire or the mistakes I've made. But I can promise you this. I will protect you and this home with everything I have. And I want to be part of your life if you'll let me. Clara's chest swelled with emotion. She had hidden her fortune, her plans, and even her heart for so long, but now, facing Gideon's honesty, she felt the walls around her begin to crumble. I trust you, she said softly, and I want the same. Gideon's expression softened, and for the first time he allowed himself to smile fully. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. In that moment, the homestead was no longer just wood and stone. It was a home filled with hope, trust, and the possibility of love. The following morning, they worked together to plant the first seeds in the garden. Clara laughed as Gideon struggled with the shovel, and he grinned despite himself, the warmth between them growing stronger with every shared task. The villagers watched from a distance, some in awe, some in quiet admiration. The home had been restored, stronger than before, and so had the bond between Clara and Gideon. As the sun climbed higher, a gentle wind swept across the homestead, carrying with it the scent of fresh soil and new beginnings. Clara stood on the porch, looking out over the garden and the fields beyond. The fire's memory lingered faintly in her mind, but it no longer held power over her. She had faced the past, uncovered the truth, and rebuilt not just a home, but herself. Gideon joined her, placing a hand over hers. It's beautiful, he said quietly. All of it. The home, the land, and you, Clara smiled, feeling a warmth she had never known. It is, she agreed, because we built it together. For the first time in weeks, silence fell over the homestead, peaceful and complete. The shadows that had lingered for so long seemed to retreat, and the air felt lighter, freer. Clara and Gideon stood together, watching the sunlight play across the walls they had rebuilt, feeling the bond that had grown stronger than any fear or secret. As evening approached, they lit lanterns around the porch and garden, casting a soft glow across the home. Clara felt a sense of calm she had never expected to find in a place so marked by loss. She knew the future would bring challenges, but for now they had reclaimed their sanctuary. The homestead, once reduced to ashes, now stood as a symbol of endurance, courage, and love. Clara and Gideon had faced the past, rebuilt what was lost, and discovered a connection deeper than either had anticipated. The fire that had threatened to destroy them had ultimately forged them stronger together. As the stars appeared in the night sky, Clara rested her head against Gideon's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "We did it," she whispered. "Yes," he replied softly, "and we'll face whatever comes next together." The wind whispered through the trees, gentle and calm. The shadows of the past no longer held power over the homestead or the two who had dared to rebuild it. For Clara and Gideon, the ashes had given way to light, and the home they had restored was not just a place of wood and stone. It was a home of trust, hope, and a bond that would endure whatever the future held. The night deepened, and the lanterns glowed softly, reflecting in the windows and casting a warm light over the homestead. Clara and Gideon sat together on the porch, hands entwined, watching the stars. The journey had been long, the past full of shadows, but they had emerged stronger, united, and ready for the life ahead. And somewhere in the quiet of the forest beyond, the final whispers of the fire faded, leaving only the promise of renewal, love, and the home they had fought to reclaim.